All right.
Okay, the recording has started.
Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody. Today we're going to take a little bit of a detour in this reference thing to look at some inside plants and what an ecological reference would be for that. And we're going to spend another hour talking about latest updates with the Toronto seed strategy. Just like to start off with land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge that the land on which we work is the historical territory of the Wendat, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit Nations. The territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Covenant, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work with them. I've always thought that a land acknowledges can be a little bit ceremonial, but if you stick around for the second session, you'll see that how we're going to put this into practice in terms of Indigenous engagement. So we'll get into that a little bit more a little bit later. Also, I'd like to acknowledge what a privilege it is to meet on this platform and all of the hard work that men, women, and sometimes even children do to produce the materials to be able to connect all of these phones and devices and all of the materials to make those phones and devices. So I just think about that when I was coming up with the land acknowledgement. Also, I need to thank Davishka and Michaela and Sam and a whole bunch of people behind the scenes who helped to make this day possible. So thank you all. Okay, so I'm Jonas, and I'm going to be introducing Sam in a moment. We realize that for many of you, you may not be familiar with the idea of an ecological reference. So the first few minutes, we're just going to do a little overview. Then I'm going to hand the reins over to Sam to talk a bit about this inside reference. And then we are going to cruise through that. You'll see how we go, what the methodology was and what we ended up with. And I'd like to stress that this is sort of an intellectual exercise that comes from staring at the walls and being in a pandemic, and that this is obviously the very, very scratching the surface beginnings, and there's a lot of directions to go from here. So we just started on this idea of a reference for inside, and we just want to share that with you. Then in our second hour, we're going to give you a bit of a behind the scenes look at the Toronto seed strategy and where we're at with it, including meeting all of the different stakeholders and people who are interested in it, and looking at some of the seed lists that have been submitted by various members of our ad hoc working group. We also have some surprise announcements for you as well. Okay, so quickly, ecological references, it sounds fancy, but really it's just when you start off with a site and you ask yourself, is there an ecosystem nearby that has these dynamics? And when we're talking about cities, often though they may not be very obvious. If you're talking about a condo, there's no soil to look at, there's no plants to look at. So how do you build a reference? How can you compare it to an ecosystem when there's nothing there to start? And so we spent a lot of time thinking about what were the dynamics? What's the heat regime? What's the water regime? What's the light regime, wind? And we started to look at literature reviews of all of the information available on cliffs and crevices and cracks and alvars. And we did an inventory of all of that. We cross-referenced that with commercial availability, and we came up with a palette of plants. So we were thinking about all of this cliff stuff, but then when we came to do somebody's balcony, we tried to bring it over and say these dynamics are the same. So why don't we try to come up with a soil that would be kind of mineral based, kind of gravelly, well drained, but come up with a plant palette that could survive. So this is a friend of mine, Joel Leon, who's the Toronto Society of Architects, and he has a whole planting on his balcony. And we can extend that idea of the ecological reference way beyond buildings. We can look at roofs, we can look at woodland, understory, we can look at alvars and laneways. And of course, the idea, the ecological, fundamental ecological principles, they stay the same, whether you're talking about a little crack in the concrete or a whole rail corridor. This is the West Toronto Rail Path. And so in practice, it means that we have a basis to make a plant list, quickly generate a plant list. Most people think of a woodland understory as a obvious ecological reference, but also talus slopes, scree. Most people forget to include, the buildings, the streets, the walkways, the walls, and these actually do have an incredible impact on the conditions for plants to grow. So aggregates, heat from the building, so all of these things. And this is a good example here. This is the landscape architecture building that Sam had planted with 400 species of herbaceous and woody plants from seed. And you can see, you can only imagine how much heat is there off of that concrete wall. Here's another one where we were looking at an alvar reference, which is basically the plants that grow in little crevices on pavements in and around Southern Ontario. And so we thought it would be good to sort of enable some of these natural processes to occur in the city using that sort of alvar reference. So that was just a quick and dirty overview. I'm going to hand it over to Sam now to sort of explore this idea of what life is like at room temperature. Sam?
Yes, I'm here. I'm hoping I am being heard all right.
Yeah, I can hear you just fine.
And thank you for the introduction, Jonas. That really helps set the stage and get people focused on the idea that wherever you are, whether it's indoors or outdoors, you're in an environment. And certainly when we start thinking about indoor environments, we don't often think that there could be a natural ecosystem that might equate with it. And on the surface, it is true. They're highly unique, particularly the modern urban indoor environment with its air conditioning and its HVAC systems, keeping everything very modulated. You think, well, there's nothing that's going to match that. And there isn't something that does match it perfectly, but there are close analogies. And I think this is where we have to start, is what analogies are we looking for in terms of environment? We want something that's going to be roughly room temperature of 20 to 25 degrees centigrade. I originally wanted to do this 15 to 25, 10-degree spread, because windows tend to be cooler in the wintertime particularly. But 20 to 25 is considered to be roughly room temperature. Dry, sometimes painfully so. And variable light regimes ranging from a plant's point of view, really good light to absolutely abysmal. But light is something that can be manipulated. Temperature can be manipulated too, to a certain degree in some circumstances. And dryness, in this case, it's both dryness of the air and dryness of growing medium. These two can be manipulated, although dryness of medium is probably easier to manipulate. So why would we want to do this generally? What's the context for doing this? We all have an affinity to the natural world. And some of us who are lucky to spend much of our childhood in close approximation to fields and forests and woods and streams benefit enormously by this. And most of us are now living in cities, so this kind of exposure is hard to get, but we yearn for it. And certainly in the past year or so, spending so much time isolated indoors, the yearning for seeing life is, I think, greater than ever. And this biophilia is something that I think we can build upon. And certainly if we start thinking of interior environments as having some sort of analog in the natural world, out of which we might abstract plants and use them more conducive to their well-being, it will be our well-being in the end that benefits. And the slides that have been coming up are instances where the architecture of buildings has been designed to incorporate the view out into the living world. And the proposition here is, let's pull it inside into our own living domain where we're now increasingly stuck. So this can be at any different scale that you can think of, whether it's at the residential scale, the commercial scale, an industrial scale, an institutional scale. The larger the building, I think the more opportunities you have, obviously, the more that you can bring plants together, the more opportunities you have. Plants are social creatures as well. They require other forms of life often to fully express themselves, and we'll come up with at least one example of this later on. So the actual methodology now, how did we go about tackling this question? First, of what environments approximate the indoor condition? And that's the first step. And there are roughly 5 parts of the world that are considered to be, quote, Mediterranean, unquote, in their climatic regime and the similarities of their ecosystems. And the 5 are in Southwest and South Australia, the Southern African Cape area, and the central Chilean part of South America, the California and Northern Baja California area, and of course the Mediterranean area. So these 5 areas have climatic regimes that overlap with that 20 to 25 degree range. Our humidity low by and large. It does change a bit in different ones of those 5 areas at different times of the year, but they're generally low humidity, low soil moisture, and variable light regime, particularly where there's what we might call uneven terrain, mountainous or hilly terrain. There's variable light regime. So the first thing you have to do is identify which one of these 5 you want to work with. They're all different when it comes to plant material, the species and the genera of plants that are found in them, even though they're all climatically very, very similar. So in this case, we decided to go with the chaparral habitats of Southern California around San Diego. And you could do this with any of the others, but we chose this. So the fynbos of South Africa is another good equivalent to start with. And the gari of the Mediterranean, this goes by a number of different names, and it varies quite wildly throughout much of the Mediterranean basin. And I'd just like to point out that this is a alternative climax ecological ecosystem. It's not the original climax ecosystem. It's the, which was an oak forest. That's long gone by about 3,000 years or more. The Mallee of Australia is another equivalent area. And the Matorral of Chile is quite similar in climatic conditions, though again, you have species that are entirely different. So this slide took a bit of time to come up. This is a massively detailed map of California's ecoregions. And this is where we started for our example. And the ecoregions of California are spatially quite small often, but that's a result of the mountainous terrain. And this offers a lot of possibility because we get different light regimes in a mountainous environment, whether the aspect of the slopes are north, south, or east, west. So we decided to work with this one. So if we could have the next slide. This is a zoom in to around San Diego. And on the left, you see a list of ecoregions subdivided quite a bit because of the mountainous terrain. And we decided to go with one called 85G, the Diegan Western Granitic Foothills. And you see it circled on the map, but it's also listed on the left-hand side there. And when we selected this, part of the rationale for this particular one was it wasn't right at the coast where ocean influences might be hard to replicate if certain species were quite endemic to that. But it wasn't so far inland that the temperature regimes would start to be too extreme, particularly in terms of heat. And this turned out to be a nice balance. Now, the next thing we did, it says step 3, develop generalized plant lists, but what we did next was we took that ecoregion title and we plugged it into an app called iNaturalist. And for those of you who don't know iNaturalist, it's a crowdsourced plant identification. And it's worldwide, and it's incredibly detailed, and it offers a huge amount of potential to anybody who's interested in understanding plants and their environment. And it is already developed to the point where you can take an ecoregion name like the Diegan Western Granitic Foothills and plug it in, and you instantly get a list of plants. There's a number of filters that you can use on this to shorten lists down. But you can see here on this very simple search, there's 1,331 species of plants that are found within this particular ecoregion. And you can take the names of any of those plants that are in that list, and you can then check them in more detail by going to online databases to find out more information about the plants themselves and about the environments that they inhabit, and anything that might be of particular interest when you're trying to decide whether or not it's a plant you want to use in an interior environment. And the 3 that we worked with extensively here were, this is the FEIS, the Fire Effects Information System of the USDA. We also used what is it called? CalScape, which is the California Native Plant Society, and they were very interesting to refer to because they would say, and they do say, where there is commercial availability for the particular species. And that can be quite a good thing to know, particularly from our vantage point, because if it is, then there are mechanisms for us to be able to access those plants through our local nurseries and the free trade agreements that exist. There are mechanisms that allow for this. So the last one we looked at, the 3rd, is the Wildflower Center, which has some really, really useful information on environmental conditions that are necessary for different species of plants native to North America. I will just reference one other that doesn't come up here because we didn't use it extensively for this particular exercise, but the Missouri Botanical Garden is also an excellent site, although it is meant for the general reader most of the time, or the general individual, and it doesn't always provide anything that is deeply ecological on its website, but it's a good website to use when all else fails. So those were the 3 sites. And we went through that, and as you'll see shortly, I selected out about 10 species of plants, half of them shrubs, half of them herbaceous plants. And then we had to narrow down the list. So assuming you've got this far and you have 25 plants out of the whole list, out of those 1,300 odd plants, and you've got a couple of dozen of them, and you want to then decide how you're going to narrow it down. How do you use those 3 websites to narrow down your list? These are some of the things that you should be thinking about. So the aesthetic values, and this is an important one because obviously this is an environment that most of us don't experience on a daily basis. And the aesthetics of how this would come into being may not be the kinds of lush tropical and semi-tropical environments that we're so often used to seeing in indoor environments, particularly in larger spaces. So you have to keep in mind aesthetically what you're going to end up with. Then you have to think about biotic relationships. And there are quite a lot of these that deserve consideration. One in particular is allelopathy, which is the control of a plant's environment by chemicals that it exudes into the soil, either through its roots or through rainwater that drops off the branches and leaves and trunk, or whether it's out of leaves that are shed onto the ground. And many of the plants in these kinds of Mediterranean environments have allelopathic capacity. And it does limit what you can put with what and expect to survive or do well. So you have to be somewhat alert to allelopathy, but there are other relationships that might be important too, and I'll point out 1 or 2 a little later. Then you want to pay attention to, obviously, the humidity requirements, sun requirements, and water requirements of what you've selected. And then any maintenance issues that you may have to deal with. If you've got something that really looks great, but it's going to be thorny, that's a maintenance issue. Ultimately, you don't want it to get too close to people. Seasonal growth, reproduction, and proliferation. How does this thing reproduce, either vegetatively or sexually? And is any of that going to be an issue in how you use it within an interior environment? So we're going to have a look at one plant in particular to show some of the information that comes out of this kind of review. This is Toyon, which has the botanical name of Heteromeles arbutifolia. And it's a fairly spectacular tree, particularly in fruit. And from the iNaturalist site, you can see all kinds of information that gets associated with it. There are multiple views that you can see of the plant, ranging from one like this to ones of the plant in different times of the year, to ones where it is in flower in the middle of winter, when it is young, when it is old. There's a huge database of images of the plant within the ecoregion 85G. So you get a good sense of what this plant is going to look like by scrolling through the images that people have uploaded. And you can be sure of the vetting of these species that you're looking at. They're vetted within iNaturalist, and there are a lot of them that are considered research grade images. So this is another one we looked at, the chaparral whitethorn, Ceonanthus leucodermis. This is related to the Ceonanthus that we already use heavily in our outdoor environments. But this one is quite specific to a number of different ecoregions in the American Southwest. And again, the website iNaturalist will have a lot of images of this. Blue elderberry. This is Sambucus caerulea. And this is actually often considered to be a subspecies of Sambucus racemosa, depending on who your taxonomic authority is. But this one, again, is quite specific to these dry habitats, moderate temperatures of Southwest California. And this is an interesting one. This has got a great deal of drought tolerance to it. And all of these that we're looking at so far are evergreen. So thick-leaved yerba santa, Areodictyon crassifolium, and it's a much-branched silvery gray plant. It's in the borage family, interestingly, and its flowers, when they're fully open, have a bluish violet tinge to them. Quite a beautiful plant. Next one. And this is the point leaf manzanita. This is an Arctostaphylos, similar to the bearberry that we use locally. This one also has a silvery leaf. These are adaptations to prevent moisture loss and excessive light exposure. These are related to ultimately to things like blueberries and cranberries. And like them, they often have a strong preference for fungal mycorrhizal associations in the soil, which is something to keep in mind. And one of the reasons I selected this particular ecoregion is because the rock is granitic, so it is highly unlikely to be alkaline, which is not a good thing if you're trying to grow something like the manzanita. Okay, next one. And it's Lathyrus vestitus, and it's a herbaceous perennial. Has its flowering season, and then for much of the year it is a green trailing or climbing plant, not excessively, maybe about 4 feet typically, but it when it's not fragrant like the sweet pea, but its foliage is a lot tougher. It's not the vegetative wimp that the common sweet pea is. And it comes in a range of color naturally, not through through breeding, but naturally, ranging from white to a deep violet color. Quite a beautiful plant, particularly if it's moving through the branches of a shrub. I'll go to the next one. Now, to really sort of surprise you, I guess, I was surprised in finding this, and I was really interested when I did the research on this one. This is Pelaya mucronata. This is bird's foot cliffbrake, and Pelaya is a genus that's very, very cosmopolitan, and there are a few that are available here for outdoor use. This one is rated as being extraordinarily dry air and drought resistant. When you go and look at the images of this in iNaturalist, you can see that the leaflets are really very close to being what we might think of as a succulent leaf, which is extraordinary in a fern. And this has year-round presence. It's an evergreen. And this is a woolly Indian paintbrush, which some of you may be familiar with. Castanea, what is it, foliosa. And this particular genus of plants is widespread throughout North America. There are quite a few different species. This one is more a silvery gray and has great drought and low humidity characteristics. But like most of its kin, this is a hemiparasite. And if you want this one to flower well, to grow well, you need to have a sacrificial victim growing with it. The grass butia is often recommended as the victim. And butia is, I wouldn't say aesthetically a first-rate grass, but probably if you are trying to make this an aesthetic choice, it would not be impossible to have it work. This is the scarlet bugler, and it's a penstemon, centranthrifolia, pardon me. And this is one of the toughest dry air, drought tolerant of the penstemons, and has a fairly good bloom time in the spring, early summer. And after that, it is just a herbaceous plant. In the heat of the summer into the fall, it retreats just to the lower leaves on the stem. And then over the winter, it starts to reemerge and rapidly redevelop in the spring months. Lovely scarlet red flower. When you look at this as a whole plant, it's really quite a remarkable looking plant with nice blue, silvery green foliage. And not to leave bulbs out of the picture, this is dwarf Brodiaea, Brodiaea terrestris. And this is a bulbous plant, a geophyte, that is pretty much invisible most of the year, and then pops up with these small blue flowers or violet flowers for a fairly lengthy period in the spring. Oh, then we went on to look at other things from other areas, Haworthia being one. Haworthias in general come out of the fynbos in South Africa, the Cape area of South Africa. And there are many, many species. These are already widely available commercially throughout our zone. And many of them are often used as houseplants. But they do superbly well in environments that are indoors too. There's not as much information available on these. Then there's the fynbos aloe, which is actually quite a stunning plant. I have no idea as to its availability in our part of North America, but it is also out of the same kind of environment as the Diegan granitic foothills. And then the stone crops. A huge number of stone crops are endemic to the fynbos in South Africa. And some of them are already in commercial use in Ontario, but there's a whole range of others that are potential as well. I should point out that the crassulas and a number of other succulent species from South Africa have a peculiar form of photosynthesis in which during the day the pores are closed and there's no gas exchange of carbon dioxide and water during the day. And it's only the first stage of photosynthesis that takes place during daylight, the splitting of water part. And then after sunset, the pores of the leaves open and there's this immense release of oxygen in the evening and uptake of carbon dioxide. And this is to reduce the loss of moisture from the plant tissues. And one of the major ways in which these plants have evolved the ability to retain oxygen in their tissues so that it doesn't create damage is they produce an awful lot of antioxidants to be able to handle high concentrations of oxygen in their tissues. as a result of the light part of photosynthesis, and it gets it gets so that these plants, when they die, or when parts of them die, there's a release of these antioxidants into the soil that tends to severely limit what can grow around them. So a kind of form of allelopathy. So Gasteria is another plant. This one is actually closely related to what is it? There's a, oh, it just went in out of my head. It's a garden plant that we grow, Cnipophia. Closely related to Cnipophia, but very, very succulent and widely available. This is not a strange plant to commerce. But again, it comes out of the fynbos. So to go back to iNaturalist, you can do some amazing things in iNaturalist. You can build your own lists as you develop and research plants. You can develop a set that you can maintain within iNaturalist of plants that you can continually add to that might be useful for this purpose of interior plant use. You can do the same thing if you want for local native plants. There's lots of capacity to work with iNaturalist in ways that further your knowledge of plants. It's a great tool. Now, why would you want to use a reference when you are talking about an interior environment? Well, let's go to the next slide. You will be able to generate, using this approach, plant lists of things that you have confidence are going to be suitable for an interior environment. And if you are attentive to using things that hang out together in their natural habitats, in their natural ecosystems, then they're going to hang out together and support one another within the context of your interior planting. So you can be more assured that you're going to be successful with it. And being successful with it means that you are able to promote it. The more you promote it, the more people become aware of it, the more they would react positively to it. So this is a way to ensure that your plants are going to be more successful in the ways that you want to use them. Now, the suitability of plants includes their growth habit. And this is where the research part becomes important, because when you are designing with the plants, they're not going to be static objects. They're going to change dynamically in the course of a season, over the course of the year, but also over time. So in your research, this is one of the things that you look for, but having done that research, you're far more confident that the plant is going to be suitable to the way you want to use it. Now, as I pointed out with the chaparral around the San Diego area, this is mountainous terrain. So topography is an important consideration with respect to these plants and their soils. Those soils are granular granitic soils, very sharply drained. And rather than, my suggestion would be, rather than seeing these as individual plants sort of plopped in an interior environment, particularly larger environments, you might think of this as topography and plants that constitute the aesthetic, meaningful whole. So you can find this out more readily in doing your research about these plants and get a greater awareness of what the soil requirements are for. The wildflower.org site is particularly good at providing soil-related information. You can also find out through your research questions of how much humidity these things might require. Most of them don't require a lot of humidity. Uh, they are fine in room temperatures. Um, Artificial lighting is something that for some of them needs augmenting. I should point out of those plants I was talking about earlier, um, most of them have a range of light requirement from full sun to part shade. So they can take a degree of shade in interior environments. Okay. And at this point, I'm going to turn this back over to Jonas. I've been sort of tracking some of the questions within the chat, but I understand that we'll be able to address these later in the question and answer after session 2.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you for that. I just wanted to say how happy I was that when you convinced me to do reference this year, I was kind of resigned to the idea of not doing it. But when we came up with this idea to do the interior idea, it really sparked my imagination because it's been on the back burner for so long. You know, not really ever having been too interested in interior into houseplants, but the idea for green walls always struck me as sort of something that's sort of interesting. And even if we were to go all the way to the moon, we know that these environments would basically be the same. They'd be, you know, room temperature, dry shade, you know. So it stands to reason that there's a lot of work that could be done to in terms of research to see what plants we could bring with us in a pandemic, or what plants we could bring with us in a post-apocalyptic future where we spend a lot more time indoors, or even if we had to leave the planet, what plants would we sort of bring with us in Noah's Ark to the next place where we were going to live. So for me, this was just a fun intellectual exercise to sort of stretch our idea of reference, sort of indoors, a little bit sort of uncharted territory. So thank you very much for that. I think that what we'll do, unfortunately, Curtis Evoy had a family emergency, and he had agreed to speak about some of the plants that are growing in the temperate house at Allen Gardens. So what we're going to do is he did submit his plant list, so I'm going to make it available to everyone, and we'll be following up with an email next week, which will have a link to it. I believe Davishka was going to post it in the chat anyways. But what I'd like to do is, I'd like to leave a 5-minute break between the 2 o'clock seed strategy session. So we have 9 minutes. And so I'd like to just have a look at some of these chat questions and see what we have here. So Sam, I'm just going to read this question here. Here we go here. What considerations have been given to the fact that the overall concept, matching plants to environmental conditions in indoor settings, promotes the importation of plants and potential fungus insects from ecoregions that are very different?
Okay, this is an excellent question. And there is a certain assumption that the phytosanitary requirements for importation are going to be able to handle this. We can have varying degrees of confidence in this, considering some of the things that happened. But I was reading recently that the most significant vector for diseases and insect pests coming in is not through live plant material. It is through the use of plant materials in various things like packing that are much more likely to introduce disease organisms and insects.
Also, another consideration is that we already have a very large industry around importing plants from all over the world for as houseplants. The question that we were trying to sort of reach here was, what are those plants, and are there other plants that might be more successful in terms of growing as communities, like growing them together? And so it's a great point, but this is already, we've already, the toothpaste is out of the tooth on that one. I have a question here from Clement Ken, who says, what does hard Toronto tap water do to the granitophiles when it builds up in the soil? Well, there's a technical one.
Okay. All right. This is also a good question. And partly, I think it's a problem for a lot of plants that we grow outside in more granitic soils. And you've done some of this yourself, Jonas. So you'd probably be aware of this as much for things that you're growing in a granitic granular material. If it is sufficiently porous and well drained, I wonder if it's going to necessarily build up. You still need drainage out of these arrangements. You can't have closed arrangements for the soil where water can't move through. You still need that. So maybe it means, because this is, at this point, it is a theoretical approach that we're taking here, maybe you have to periodically use distilled water as something that flushes any calcite buildup from the hard water.
I would say that some of the plants that we were talking about are, really lend themselves to limestones and sort of basic gravelly soils. And so my experience has been, let's try and experiment a little bit with mineral soils and move away from some of the peat-based soils if we're going to be using some of these plants that already like that. And I wonder if that would have a positive. I have a question here from Ryan Godfrey. He says, has anyone had any success at all growing Southern Ontario native plant species indoors? I have spontaneous Aquilegia canadensis, who's really giving it a good effort in indoor pot, but I've not tried any others. I will say that one of the things that really, really surprised me when we started the research was how many common genuses there are, especially with the ferns. And you had asked about ferns, but Dryopteris, there's a California one. Asplenium, there's a California one. Pelia, there was a California one. And Arctostaphylos, there was 9, that's not a fern, but there was 9 Arctostaphylos that were there. So I think that there would be plants that would do well. And I'll give you an example. It's not native, but the what was it? What was the one that the spurge that was there? I forget the name.
It's the common one here.
Yeah, purslane. That was growing in California, but is also a weed in Toronto. And I thought, we could take a bunch of things and give it a try. I certainly think that the kinnikinnick would be worth trying. Arctostaphylos uva ursi would be worth trying, and certainly a few of the ferns would be worth trying. Most people have problems with ferns because the moisture isn't there, like it's too dry. But some of the common ones don't necessarily need that. They can handle a bit of the dryness. So I think I would try those. Oh, there's a whole bunch of questions here.
Yeah, there's one from Pete about the proportion of existing indoor plants on the market. I would just have something very roughly to offer here, and it's based on my experience from a few decades ago in managing retail commercial greenhouses. I would say that we're mostly dealing with tropicals and subtropicals, but those coming out of the 5 areas that we've identified, the fynbos gives us a lot of species. Then there are a lot that come out of drier environments generally that are offered by way of succulents and cacti, if they're American. The euphorbias from Africa. There are a great many of these species that find their way into the market, but I would think that based on my own experience, there's probably about 30% come out of the 5 areas that we identified at the start. The vast majority, I think, are much more tropical.
I'd just like to jump in and say that I work with the Landscape Ontario Horticultural Trade Association, and we have 11 sector groups, and one of them is the indoor plant sector group. And I always feel bad because we always come up with meeting topics for our members, and we've never done one for interior. So I apologize to all the members who work on interior landscapes or interior design. And I hope that if you're out there, if you did come to today, that you found it useful, or maybe that it sort of may change your thinking a little bit, and maybe provided some new directions for you to explore.
I have one question I want to respond to.
Yes.
And that's Steve Smith asked this a while ago, or noted this a while ago about nothing replaces proper but botanist ID, and I would agree heartily. Images and visual keys are good up to a point, but they give you a name. They don't give you a sense of the plant and what that plant is and how that plant behaves and how it interacts with its environment. And to me, you don't really know a plant until you know that. Knowing the name is not enough, which is why, I took everybody through this rollicking ride of quick research.
So Sam, we've got a few questions here about pollution and filtering and air quality.
Mm-hmm. Well, air quality is a good one. During the late 80s and 90s, there were a couple of living walls installed in a few places around Toronto. And I remember one that went in an insurance company down Simcoe and Queen Street West area. And it was lavishly tropical, green walls on 3 sides of the boardroom, with a trough holding water below, and the water being recycled and trickling down through the medium the plants are growing in. And it was absolutely stunning. And the insurance company removed it when the first hint of legal liability for people's allergy to moles started surfacing in the building. The air quality of the building had this hidden negative because of the tropical use of the plants. Tropical.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Michaela jumps in and says that there was a study that we would need way more plants to make a big difference.
Yes.
In indoor air quality. And that brings to mind something where we haven't really addressed, which is that we only give a very small amount of space and consideration, both indoors and outdoors, for plants. And in fact, if anything, we're paving and adding more hardscape every day. So this seems to be a comment that's sort of saying, well, can we create more space for that? And maybe those vertical spaces where people don't walk would be the ideal place for that.
Yeah, no, I would agree that you would need an awful lot of green plants packed into interior spaces to change the air quality. Now, this is perhaps just me, but I am far more inclined to incorporate plants into an interior environment based on my love of them.
Sam, I'm going to stop you there.
Yeah, okay.
We're 3 minutes to 2. Here's what I'm going to do. We are going to have a chance for a half an hour after the second session. We're going to have 2 rooms, one just for inside plants, one just for the seed strategy stuff. So hold your questions. We're going to take a 2-minute break. We're going to start right at 2 o'clock with the seed strategy stuff. If you came here just for the inside plant stuff and you're curious, you're more than welcome to stay for the second session. If you're here for the seed strategy stuff, thank you for coming. We are going to start right at 2 o'clock, and you will have to go ahead and put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to those in the half hour at 3 o'clock. Okay, so thank you very much for coming. If there are questions we don't get to, then we'll just we'll try to get to them by email later. I can be reached at jonas@ecoman.ca. I'll be sending out an email to everyone who attended, and Sam can also be reached. I'll put his email in the chat if you need to reach him directly. He's the academic coordinator of the Ryerson Landscape Design Program. So we're just going to take a 1-minute break here, and then we'll jump back in. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. Okay, we're back. It's 2 o'clock. We are going to switch gears here 180 degrees from inside. We're going to go to the Toronto seed strategy portion of the day. I just wanted to start off by giving you a little bit of an overview. There may be a bunch of you who don't know what a Toronto seed strategy is. So I'm just going to give you a quick little overview. And if you'll just let me, just going to try and share my screen here. Okay, here we go. So this is a map that I made to try and encapsulate some things. So let me just walk you through this really quickly. So when I first reached out to people, the idea was to identify and engage stakeholders, which we started to do in our first meeting, and identify appropriate desirable species, plants that we would actually want to have involved in a seed strategy. And then, of course, collecting source identified seed and establishing seed orchards. So one of the things that you'll find when you start to use native plants is that sometimes you can't find the species that you need, or you can't find them in the quantity that you want, or even grown in the format that you need, the size. And so one of the strategies that's being implemented is this idea of a seed orchard, where you grow a bunch of plants that you've collected from a remnant ecosystem, and then you grow them close by, and then you can monitor them. And then when they're ready, you collect the seed, and then you can establish more plants. So you're basically creating a safe and secure and stable supply. And then we wanted to engage with growers and to grow some of the source identified seed, and of course educate the public and advocate for this idea. We also established a communication platform where we could sort of chat about all this. And so when we started to think about a seed strategy for Toronto, we ended up with this very complicated set of stakeholders. So I'm just going to walk you through this very quickly. And that is, we have this public sector sort of branch here. And that's divided up in, we can look at Landscape Ontario, the Horticultural Trade Association. There's contractor groups, including myself, but we have Steve Smith from Urban Forest Restoration, and of course, all the other contractor groups. But I'm only putting those two here because they were at our seed strategy meeting the first time around. We also have growers, and with growers, we have native plant growers, of which we had a couple of representatives last time around, and they have an Ontario native plant growers group, and this includes Native Plants of Claremont, Verbinin, Grow Wild, and a whole host of others. We also have conventional growers that grow ornamental plants, but also native plants. And we have some Indigenous growers as well, and I'll get to those in a moment. But we have another branch of people we need to engage, which is the public sector. And of course, we have Toronto Region Conservation Authority, which they didn't come last week, and I was hoping that we would be able to get them to present today. We have Natural Resources Canada, which is the federal level, which we did have Melissa Spearing come and talk about that last time. And then we have the City of Toronto, which is divided up into sort of a political wing and a policy framework, and then this the actual boots on the ground, which is urban forestry and natural resource management. So we did have Kristen Vincent come, and she's, I believe, here again to talk about the plant list, the plants that they use for their restoration projects. Then, of course, we have the Toronto Biodiversity Strategy and the Ravine Strategy. And so keeping going here, we also have this nonprofit sector. And we have Ontario Plant Restoration Alliance, which they have started seed orchards in various counties around Ontario. And Stefan Weber was instrumental in helping me in guiding my thinking on this. And so we've worked together a few times. We've grown some contract growth of source identified seed together. And then we have Carolyn in Canada. And we also have Sarah Winterton, I believe, is coming today. She's going to tell you a little bit about some research that they're doing to try to find more information. And we have WWF. And of course, we have academia, Ryerson University, where Sam's from. And we have University of Toronto. We had Sheila Boudreau last time, and she's here today. And of course, Humber College. And the reason I sort of wanted to sort of do it this way, or sort of explain it this way, was to show how complicated and sort of multifaceted all the components are of this system. And one of the challenges of working with native plants at scale is that we often cannot get what we need when we need it. And the growers often don't have enough time to grow what the plants that are being asked for, or if they grow them, and then they can't find a buyer. So there's a lot of problems on the supply side that have sort of prevented seed strategies from happening over the past few decades. And so my sort of hypothesis or idea was, what can we do if we all work together a little bit here? And so that was sort of the impetus. And you'll see, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, I don't really see any Indigenous. And I thought Jonas had said we were going to do some Indigenous engagement here. And that's actually right. We don't have the Indigenous on this mind map. And obviously we should, right? So the purpose of the first meeting was to sort of get to know each other and sort of meet each other in this online format. And what I'd hoped to do was to sort of circle back to some of the people that we didn't get to hear from the first time around. So unfortunately, I just got a message from Gary Pritchard that he is delayed. So The first person I'd like to invite to speak and to talk a bit about this Indigenous engagement piece and about the youth education program that was started and now resides at U of T is Sheila. Are you there? Are you able to unlock your mic? Hold on one second.
Yes, I think.
Oh, there you are. Okay. Hi,
Hi.
Sheila. Why don't you start off by just telling us a little bit about the program, which I did give a whole bunch of links to in the email, but why don't you, for those of us who are just catching up now, can you just tell us a little bit about the program and what you see could be an interesting crossover as far as engagement goes?
Sure. So just to be clear, I'm going to speak to when I was involved in the program. Right now, I'm really just a mentor, and the program is now hosted by University of Toronto. But if you want, I could also show some slides that I used to talk about how the program started at Toronto Region Conservation Authority, or I can just speak off the top of my head.
Yeah, if you want to share your screen, yeah, you can do that.
And I can share this presentation with you later as well. Okay, so it says host disabled still.
Okay, hold on. Davishka, if you could enable Sheila's screen share.
But even just to explain, I am a landscape architect and a planner, and I teach part-time at Ryerson University as well as University of Toronto. And I used to be at the City of Toronto as an urban designer working with students from Wandering Spirit School on placemaking and projects that I was responsible for that are related to green infrastructure. And then in 2017, I went to the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, and my staff was really interested in the idea of creating and supporting a program for Indigenous youth to work with conservation and restoration. And so I pitched the idea to U of T and spoke for a long time actually with the Native Canadian Centre Toronto about the idea, and that's sort of the origins of that. So I'm going to see if I can. Oh yeah, it says I can't still.
I just gave you permissions to share.
Oh, there we go. So this is a long presentation, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I'm just going to kind of flip through it. So one of the reasons I was starting this was I was really concerned that the Indigenous community did not seem to have a voice in ecological restoration work, landscape architecture, planning, you name it. And so we were working with green infrastructure, and I worked with Fred Martin of the Native Canadian Centre of Toronto, Liat Margolis, and we ended up getting some seed funding to start a program at the Toronto Region Conservation Authority. So I had support from the manager of the Bolton Camp project, Lucia Piccini. She worked very closely with me. She managed a Girls Can Too program, and Bolton Camp is actually an abandoned camp which was running successfully for I think 75 years, and TRCA inherited this beautiful property up in Bolton, and they were reimagining what could happen with the property with involved. And part of this work was ecological restoration, like creek restoration, looking at how to repurpose ash trees that are taken down and turning them into furniture that the Girls Can Too program, the girls could learn about trade tools and how to build things. And there's a long story about Bolton Camp. But anyway, what I saw was an opportunity. And I was also teaching and thinking about using teaching to engage the Indigenous youth that entered that program in the first year. And so this is just a picture at one of the other projects my team at TRC was working on with my students. So I was really interested in land-based teaching, and that was actually Elder Wabagoon in the red jacket that you see right there, and her partner Carl Shea. And so Elder Wabagoon became the elder for the program, and she's now the first person's representative to the dean. I might not have that right, but she's at University of Toronto, and she's the elder leading the program, which became known, which the new name for it that was evolved.
Sheila, I'm just gonna cut you there. are you, if you have to click on your share screen, we're not seeing your picture.
Oh
So if you
dear.
just go down to the green arrow in front of you,
Oh my
and
goodness.
then you'll be able to pick the screen that you want to share. So if you have,
Yeah, I thought
I'll tell you when we got it. Yep, there you go. Now we've got it. Yep,
sorry about that.
that's fine. No, if you
I'm
just go
like,
to, and then just change your view to full screen, and then we'll have it.
I'll just flip through those quickly. So that
Yeah,
was
perfect. Okay, we've
that
got
was
it.
the picture of just the grant, the seed money, Landscape Architecture Canada Foundation. This is the Bolton Camp. Those are some of the Girls Can Too program. These are images of the cabins. And artists were brought on to work with the youth to think about ideas to clean up the camp and imagine what this camp could be. And it's always, TRCA, this is run by, at the time, the Girls Can Too, I think because of COVID and the construction is on hold right now, but this whole camp project is run by the outreach and education people. Education and training might be their new term, but this is a picture showing the creek restoration work and the plantings and the soil erosion. So there's a lot of opportunity for planting and learning, green sector skills on the land. Also, the idea of traditional teachings and having an elder and knowledge keepers come out and work with the youth.
Oh, I think we might have lost. Oh, Sheila, you're still there? You just
Yeah.
broke up for a second there.
Oh, sorry. Can you still see the screen?
Yeah, we see it beautifully. Yeah.
So, I mean, it's kind of a complex thing, but I don't work in silos. My brain doesn't work in silos. So I have opportunities here, there, and I kind of put them together. And so my teaching became an opportunity for the youth to come out. The program became known as Nikabi Gigwag. The name was created by the youth working with Elder Wabagoon, and it means flooded valley healing. And so the idea is to be, learning on a traditional way, but also, some skills that the youth can think about horticultural trades, aquatic habitat trades. And this is Elder Wabagoon with Jamie White Crow, who's an Indigenous filmmaker, who was one of our many mentors the first year. So she was teaching the youth about telling their stories through little films using iPhones. And it was a pretty cool program. Ran out of the Daniels School because the summer studio was closed down, so we could actually run it out of space. And these are just some images of Bolton Camp. I think I used this in a presentation to talk about who TRCA is to the Native Canadian Centres youth group, so that we were always checking in with the Indigenous youth programs that they have, because the idea was to have opportunities for this in the future.
And that's so fantastic, because
anyway,
one of the things that we have as a huge problem in the horticultural profession is we have a lack of skilled workers to do this sort of frontline work, whether it's climate or water or in conservation. And so, to my mind, this seems like a really great place to find that engagement. To my mind, would you agree?
Yeah, and we wanted to also start from the idea of planning the restoration, planning the projects and designing the projects. And so it would be full through, like stewardship and connecting with the trees. And so it was really, Indigenous led. We're co-founders, but we're not as settlers, or I have mixed ancestry, driving it. It was also the youth led. It was really important that the youth are paid for their time and that they're creating the program for TRCA and for future generations. So anyway, this project right now, Bolton Camp, I believe is sort of on hold because of the construction. It's a huge property. I'm just showing you these images, but one of the thoughts that I had with Gary recently is the idea of seed orchards, and that Bolton Camp is an ideal location to have some seed orchards happening with youth programs. The programs are already established, and it could be supporting what the team people here are interested in. The Toronto Blue Jays paid to have an accessible ball diamond built, and so there's a cabin building that's being built with washrooms, and it's heated, and so there'll be year-round facilities for people that come to the camp. I don't think there's a slide. I think that was an artistic liberty being taken. But there is a little. I'm going to end there. There is a pool that's an accessible pool for people to use. And so the students learned about all these things, right? They learned about accessible needs and how do you design for that, and where did the plants come from? We did a tour of Guyanaceae Plant Nursery. I took them out there. I was kind of helping to create the first year, the second year, and then now it's really out of U of T. But this model is something that, so Gary, I think he's still running late. He's in a Chiefs meeting.
You know what, Sheila? It's okay, because we've made a hash of the agenda already, because Kristen Vincent from the City of Toronto has a meeting at 2:30. So I'm gonna switcheroo. I'll put Kristen Vincent up, and the reason that I'd like to bring Kristen Vincent up right now is just because we had talked about species, what species would be appropriate to sort of target. And one of the things that we came up with was, well, why don't we have people tell us a bit about what plants they're using and what plants they have a hard time, finding. And so Kristen Vincent does restoration with the City of Toronto. So if Kristen could, let's see if I can get
Hi there.
Oh, you're there. Okay, great.
I'm going to try and share my screen with my spreadsheet here. Hi, everyone.
Stop share.
Happy to be here and share some of these species lists.
Make you a co-host, so now you should be able to share. Okay.
Is that working?
I can see it. Yep, fantastic.
Okay, and I'm not going to turn my video on just because my internet is a little bit shoddy. So here we've put together some species lists in the last couple of years of what we've planted. I think this is a compilation from 2020 back to 2017 of our most commonly planted species. So as you can see, there is 17 tree species and 16 shrub species there. These are planted through my group, which is Forest and Natural Area Management. We have field staff that plant these in high quality natural areas throughout the City of Toronto, but this also includes some of our Natural Environment Community Program plant material. So that is a volunteer run plantings. So that gives you an idea of our most commonly planted species. So these go anywhere from, let's say, 250 to up to 1,500 per season, so spring and fall. So I just switched to, and we can provide this list if anyone would like to have a better look at it after the presentation. But these are more of our, this is our full exhaustive plant species list. So these run anywhere from planting, say, 5 and up to 1,500 species. So there's our trees listed there, and anything highlighted in orange is typically hard to find species for us. Just like lots of them are slow growing species. So we have a hard time sourcing them, but we also try to avoid putting large numbers on our planting plans because we need to plant numbers to reach our targets. So then I'm just moving down here to our shrubs. And again, these are planted. Our most commonly planted shrubs are chokecherry, purple flowering raspberry, alternate dogwood. We plant a lot of serviceberry. But as you can see, there's some common hard to source ones in this list. So not only do when we put out our plant order, we have a hard time finding hard to source species, but we also have a hard time filling full quantities of our plant orders. So the nurseries, the reputable native plant nurseries, are not being able to fulfill our quantities to that extent. So, and then we don't focus too much on rare species at the City of Toronto. High Park would be a place where we plant the most rare species. But throughout the city, we have an invasive problem for anyone that doesn't know. So we try to plant some hardy species that will take hold and change ecosystem from native or invasive to native. So then I'm just going to share my last species list here. This is a herbaceous planting that we've done over the past 2 years, I guess. So lots of these species, again, are not only planted in High Park, but they are grown from our internal High Park nursery. We will plant herbaceous stock at certain restoration sites, but it's just dependent on the conditions specifically at those sites. So I'm going to leave it there. I don't have too much else to add. I'm happy to answer questions if anyone wants to contact me or anyone has any comments later.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And we've already got these lists up for those of you who came to the first meeting. There is a link to it, and I'll be updating it with the other lists as they come in. So
there's a comment about a source if you want me to answer that now.
Oh yeah,
There's
sure.
a minute.
Go for it.
So most of our plant material, because we're planting in high quality natural areas and ESAs throughout the city of Toronto, we are sourcing a good majority of that plant material from reputable native plant nurseries across Ontario that have identified their seed source. We ask each species where the seed has been, or what zone the seed's been collected from. So that's about 35,000 pieces per year between the two programs.
Excellent. Okay, I think we'll try to get back on track here. Paul Morris was going to give us a bit of a perspective from his vantage point. He's a grower, also working with TRCA and on the Meadoway. So Paul, can I get you to, let's see if I can disable your mic here. Hold on.
I think he's got it.
Oh, you got it? Okay, so Paul, go ahead. And
let me see here.
Are you there?
Yep. I'm just. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Oh wow, thank you. Look at this slides, fantastic.
Can you see it? So is that big enough? I can't tell.
Yeah, if you go to full of, yeah, that's good. That's good.
Okay, so yeah, this is just an image of the Meadoway project. So it's 16 kilometers from the Don River and then all the way to the Rouge River. So this is a huge meadow restoration project that covers 16 kilometers. And the black areas through here have been done. The middle section was done as the Scarborough Butterfly Trail. And that was done a number of years ago as a pilot project. And then we did section 7 towards the Rouge. And then last year and the year before, we did section 1 and section 2. And now we're working on section 5 this year. And then after that, section 3, the 2 red at the end, and section 6 will be done. So we're doing about 20 hectares or more of meadow restoration per year. And this is just an example of some of the meadow restoration, the different seed mixes that we're using. We're using the green is a grass seed mix, and the sort of beige is a wildflower seed mix. Around the towers, the hydro requester, we put in a very low 50 centimeter seed mix. We also have areas with high invasive species pressure, so we put in a resilient mix of all the toughest species that can withstand those invasive species, hopefully. And we also have wet meadow areas, which is the light bluey green, I guess. And so we have wet meadow mix as well. So we have all the different seed mixes that we're using. This is just section 1.1, 1.2. So you can see the scale of some of these plantings. It goes up to section 1.5. So it goes a considerable area that we're doing restoration on.
Fantastic.
And so one of the things that we did is we've developed a whole bunch of different native seed mixes. So you can see here's the butterfly meadow, and then we have wet meadow, and then short meadow, dry grass mix. And then for other properties, that kind of, this was the meadoway mixes that I developed. And then after that, they were asking for, okay, we need bobolink and meadowlark habitat specific seed mixes. And then short mix, that was around the tower. And then we got into all sorts of other, okay, what about this scenario? What about that scenario? So I just made up a whole bunch of different seed mixes that for all sorts of different scenarios, stream stabilization and farm edge, things like that. Really expensive mixes for developers because we wanted to encourage them to plant. So yeah, and just all these different seed mixes. And then so some of the more challenging seed mixes are things like the swamp seed mix, things that have a lower light. We're not getting as many species in there because the growers aren't growing them because they're hard to get seeds for. And then if you get into a deep shade, wet seed swamp mix, then you're really running into problems finding different species because these species don't, they're not easy to produce a lot of seed for. And the other scenario is a seed mix for under woodlands for spring ephemerals and that sort of thing. We don't have a good seed mix for that either. So that's just some of the work that I've been doing, and also a lot of these seed mixes were incorporated into a seed mix guideline, which the planning department. So any sort of the plans that come in from different developments will have to go through and use the different seed mixes that I've outlined here. And so that's in process right now. It's going through, bouncing it back and forth between the different municipalities and getting their approval and their views on these different seed mixes and the seed strategy. The other part is the going through and
Paul,
eliminating some of the.
I'm just going to jump in. I'm getting a lot of questions here about whether you would be willing to share some of these lists to the group at a later time.
Yep.
Okay, everybody's getting anxious because I think they're writing down things furiously. So take your time, enjoy yourselves, everybody. We will be able to share this later. So just enjoy it. We're also recording, so you can go back. So go ahead.
Yeah,
Paul.
I mean, it's going to be part of the seed mix guideline anyway, so it's going to be public document anyway. So that's not a big deal. One of the other things we did was doing eliminating some of the more aggressive species from cover crops and nurse crops. Things like perennial rye and some of the clovers and things like that people were using, crown vetch and things like that continued to be used. So we've eliminated them from the offerings that can be used in the future.
Paul, can you give us a sense of these seeds? Are these things that you guys are growing? Are you buying these seeds? Are you collecting these seeds? Where does this stuff all come from?
Yeah, that's one of the challenges that I was going to mention. Most of these seed, because we're getting hundreds of kilos worth of seed seeding the meadoway, and so originally they were getting it from down near Windsor, and then other times we're getting it from Norfolk County. So there's actually no large seed supplier in Toronto area. So that's one of the major concerns and one of the things that we're trying to address in some programs that we're trying to develop.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Carry on.
So in the meadoway, I just wanted to mention that we're also doing a lot of work on best management practices for seeding, doing different best management practice for invasive species control, working on pollinators and hydrological regimes and comparing that with the turf before and the native meadow. So we're working with the University of Toronto on those two types of projects, as well as we're doing large scale monitoring to show the different changes over time. So the benefits of actually putting in native meadow versus leaving it in turf grass or in abandoned field.
Fantastic, Paul. This is just fabulous.
So I'm going to put on my other hat for 1 second. And so I just want to mention that with Chorus Restoration, that's I've been living in the Toronto area, and I've collected a ton of different seed for growing. I've grown a whole bunch of them, and so most of it's from the GTA. So a lot of the seed is available, and I think a lot of people are aware of different sources. TRCA knows sources with their monitoring as well. So we are aware, where the seed is. We just it's multiplying it up. It's creating the seed plots and then multiplying them up enough to that you can get larger areas that you can get actual significant seed production.
Paul,
Because
can
a
you
lot of the places are so degraded right now that they're really tiny populations of different species. So you're going to have to multiply them up over several years
Paul, can you
before you can
expand
get
on that a little
production.
bit and just share with us anything you can as far as plans for doing just that, for doing like seed orchards at scale at the TRCA?
Well, nothing's been approved, and we're just talking about it right now. I put together a bit of a plan, but as I said, nothing's been approved. We do have some spaces that are potential for using, and we do have some seed collection ideas and things like that we're moving forward on. But we have to move it through all the channels before we can put anything forward.
Excellent. Okay.
I think one of the other limitations with TRCA was that a lot of the meadow areas and the that we were looking for, we found that they didn't have that much of a population in them for the species that we were looking for these particular species mixes. That we were only finding like small patches, and there was a lot of invasive species out there, and a lot of meadow areas that we were looking at were converting back to forest. So there's a big challenge in
Right.
finding actual seed sources.
And do you think that there is interest in using the Meadowway sort of to ramp up some of those sort of grassland or prairie species?
There is potential there, yeah. I mean, we have to keep moving forward. That's one of the challenges. It's like, okay, do we have the seed, and you put it into an area and then grow it up? But then by 2024, we're supposed to be done the Meadowway. So really, you're only talking small plots. You can't really vamp it up in the Meadowway within the couple of years that we have left to complete the project.
Understood.
So that's another challenge for that area.
Fantastic. Okay. Do you have anything else you'd like to add before I move on?
I think that covers it pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah,
All
so there are
right.
people out there. I mean, myself, I grew hundreds of different species, and I grew plots, and I grew large seed areas. So I mean, the skills are out there. People know how to do this. It's just more the will and the funding to get it accomplished.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate you sharing with us, and I find it's just illuminating to see what is being done and at the moment. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh, okay. I'm going to turn now to another member of our ad hoc working group, Steve Smith. Are you here?
Yes, I am. Hey, there we go.
Okay, Steve, did you need to share your screen, or are you just going to talk?
I'm going to talk.
Okay.
You didn't ask me to prepare anything.
No,
so
no,
I
you don't need to. That's fine. I'll just, we'll just leave it on the screen. So go ahead.
Okay. I mean, to start with, it seems like Paul has stolen a lot of my fire here. The main concerns, of course, I've always pictured a program like a seed strategy to be a gene conservation strategy. We're trying to find these remnant populations of local species, get them planted out on the land and multiply them so that they're not lost as the habitat they're growing in now is destroyed from one thing or another, including natural processes just taking over that habitat. We're going to need to collect the seed, find these places, collect it, multiply them, and then make them available somehow. The Meadowway presents a great opportunity for this because you've got the land to do this. But then we're going to have to go from there to growing the plants, because seeding isn't that reliable to do unless you've got long-term follow-up. And most people are buying plants, they're planting the plants, and then taking care of them for a while until they're established, and then not doing so much after that. They just let them grow. So, you know, just putting seeds down and then waiting 5 years is not an option for a lot of people. They want the plants today, and they may be able to collect seeds from them later. So, you know, and that's why the local source is so important. We don't really need to conserve the species that are from 150 miles away. They're already being taken care of in those places where they've been planted over the last 20 or 30 years, and they're now reproducing in large numbers, some of them, and they're now being shipped into projects like the one that Paul is working on. So those ones don't necessarily need to be conserved. It's the local sources that we're looking for.
Thank you, Steve.
Adding, I don't know if there's much more that I can say to that that hasn't been already said.
Well, I was curious if you had had a chance to look at this list that we got from Charles Kinsley.
If I didn't know as much as I do about plants, I think I would find it a bit daunting to understand. So it's a good background for people who are really into plants.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What we were talking last week, and you had mentioned that there's some local knowledge that, you know, about where some of these remnant ecosystems are and where they, you know, what can be collected. Now, can you share with us if we still can access some of these sites, and if we get organized, we could probably still have like some Toronto seed for these projects?
Oh, absolutely. You know, Eric Davies is starting to map some of the big oaks around the city. I have a pretty good database that I've collected over the years of where some of these species are growing that I know of. And there's a network of plant experts who know where things are, and that could be networked a little bit more so that we can find out where things are. Absolutely
Right.
doable. You know,
Okay.
one of the tricks there always is, and I've run into this in my own business, is you can collect these seeds and you can grow up the plants, but then where do you plant them out? Some of them need very specific habitats, and you know, you don't have the spot for them. I've been stuck with hundreds of little white oaks in the past that I've grown myself, and I don't have sites suitable for growing white oak. The same thing has happened to me with yellow birch. You know, when I've tried to plant them out, they've often not done very well because I don't have sites that are suited to them at the particular moment that I have those plants available. So you've got to coordinate your supply with your demand also for this to work. Otherwise, you end up with surpluses that you don't know what to do with.
Absolutely. All right. That reminds me that I did have a pretty exciting announcement to make in regards to space, because I have a residential landscaping and gardening business. We don't have any yard or anywhere where we can grow plants. And those of you who know me know that I'm very interested in a very specific, uh, you know, curated palette of plants to do with alvars and cliffs. So I just found out today that a proposal that we did to do a seed orchard on the H&R building at 25 Dockside Drive, which is the Chorus building. Just to give you a sense of the scale, that's 25 meters by 100 meters. So it's like a football field out there, but it's all just sedums. And they've agreed to allow us to grow some of these alvar, cliffy, local plants for the purpose of seed production. So I'm absolutely ecstatic, and I'm just saying it now because I just found out this morning, and nobody knows yet. But I'm very excited about how the opportunities to work with the various groups that are around the table, and to expand this further. And I know that Stefan Weber has already, you know, told me that there'll be some source identified seed coming our way for this, and other things. So in terms of finding land, it is absolutely the biggest thing when it comes to the where these seed orchards could go, and how do you you know, how can you protect them and make sure that they're not going to be, trampled, or, maybe they'll put a condo there and then you'll have to dig them all out and use them somewhere else. So hopefully this will be sort of ground zero for the buildings or cliff orchard. But obviously we still need to find room for the rest of the stuff, the grassland stuff and the woodland stuff. Now, if Steve, if there's anything else you'd like to add, I'm going to move on. You're good? Okay. I'm going to give the microphone back to Sheila, because I don't think we're going to get Gary on the line. And Sheila had wanted to say a few more words, and I feel like I cut her off so that we could get Kristen to come in, because she had to leave at 2:30. So Sheila, if you want to come back on, is your mic? Can you come back on?
Yeah, I think I'm on.
Yeah, you're on. Okay,
Can
great. Yeah.
Sorry, Gary, as a season with the Chiefs for, but I asked him a few things, but thankfully I have another gadget here. So what I wanted to share with you is that Gary Pritchard is known as he's a certified ecological restoration expert. He's also an Indigenous engagement expert consultant. And he did a series of webinars. So the idea of Indigenous awareness and working with Indigenous communities has come up over and over, and it came up here about Indigenous seed keepers. And it's important that we take time to educate ourselves before we go out and start working with Indigenous communities. And so he did this series, and I'm just going to put the link into the chat box because it's available. They're really great. It's 3 of them are kind of higher level introductory, and then the next set are 2 that are focused on restoration, on conservation. And hold on a second. I'm just going to copy this one. This one here is remedial action plan webinar that he did a talk with on treaties of Toronto. So you can understand this area, but no matter where you are, it's important to understand the treaties of the lands and the waters where you work. I mean, the waters were actually not part of the treaties. That's another story. So I wanted to share that with you, and that some of the things that Gary and I have been talking about in the shared interests and work that we do is about the ideas of, again, opportunities to train Indigenous youth, or to have First Nations that have other growing plants that they can use in their own ecological restoration on reserves, or as economic development opportunities. So seed orchards and growing and selling plants, like Guyana Say does at Six Nations Reserve, Six Nations First Nation Credit River. And I think that's all I really wanted to say. Yeah.
That's I was talking to Gary yesterday in preparation for this, and we couldn't get over how much alignment there is with the needs and the wants that he was expressing from his community, and the needs and the wants that I know exist in the horticultural profession. So in my mind, this engagement piece is like the easy stuff. There's going to be really hard stuff, but this part to me is like a no-brainer, and I feel like there's going to be a red carpet rolled out for anybody who wants to come and work on some of these really tricky things, whether it's seed strategy stuff, restoration stuff, especially in an urban environment where we're basically living on top of each other. So I'm really excited about this, and I'm really sad that Gary couldn't come to speak to us. But Sheila, you did a great job in summarizing, what future directions. So thank you for that.
One quick thing, he's also, one of the things that's interesting is this idea of reconciliation through conservation, right? And the work being done with nature and restoration, and thinking about how that fits into reconciliation.
Yeah. Okay. I do have one other person that I wanted to call, which was Sarah Winterton from Carolyn in Canada, who's been doing research on the the demand and supply piece of the puzzle when it comes to growing native plants. And so I'd like to introduce you. I'd also like to say that Sarah is planning to host our next meeting. We're not going to give you a date yet, but it'll be at the end of March, and we're going to give you more information as we go. But Sarah, are you able to speak? We just do a mic check?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you just great. Yeah.
Thanks, Jonas. Sorry,
Did you want to share your screen, or is this okay?
No, I'm on my phone. I had some technical difficulties getting into
All
the
right,
meeting.
so then just carry on.
Yeah, so yeah, just quickly, thanks, Jonas, for the opportunity to speak to the group. I wanted to share with you some information about the research that I'm doing on the native plant economy, and invite you to participate in the survey that's been created. This work is part of a bigger project that's being coordinated by the Greenbelt Foundation called the Southern Ontario Nature Coalition, which is examining a strategy to create a near urban nature network in Southern Ontario, sort of primarily through the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So the work that I'm doing with this survey is to look at the opportunities and challenges for the native plant industry. You know, what are the barriers to its growth, especially as we're in a time now where we can see the demand growing. But I've already, heard a few people on this call identifying some of those challenges with supply and demand sort of aligning. And so the purpose of this survey is to dig into what some of those challenges and opportunities are, try to get some more data on the capacity of the native plant industry. So we're really looking at inviting anyone who connects with this whole supply chain, whether you're growing, whether you're buying, whether you're distributing, whether you're educating, to please do this survey so we can get a full look at everybody's perspectives. It's really interesting. It's really important. So I put the link to the survey in the Toronto Strategy group, but perhaps, Jonas, it can go out in a follow-up email to everybody
Absolutely. We'll be sharing we'll try to capture all this stuff, and we're going to have a follow-up email with links to all these things. So can you tell us a little bit more? You had mentioned when you spoke last week that you had interviewed perhaps a dozen or more nurseries. Can you give the people who are listening a little bit of a sense of what they're saying and how they're feeling?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think that the big challenge for nurseries is relates to the lack of advance notice they get for what people may need. So their timelines for growing stock, particularly for plants, obviously, but is longer. They frequently get orders that require almost a just-in-time kind of delivery window, and that just doesn't work for them. And so you end up with these orders like were described earlier, but they can't fulfill the orders because they haven't had enough advance notice to start growing the plants so that they'll be ready, and getting a longer term contract so that they know months, if not a couple of years in advance of what's going to be needed, especially if they're large caliper trees. It's really difficult to get that kind of advance warning or advanced order.
Yeah, I totally agree in the sense that I never really thought about supply problems. I always thought if I could convince my customers, to put these plants in their garden, that all would be well. But certainly the moment I started to go a little bit off the beaten path and try to get some of these other species, I couldn't get them in the quantity that I wanted. I couldn't get them in the format that I wanted. And so I think that the seed strategy sort of helps to stabilize things a little bit, give us a little bit more certainty and stability in terms of being able to source the seeds, and then we can take the seeds to our growers and say, hey, can you grow this
Yeah.
for next year? Or you know, I'm speaking of herbaceous. Obviously,
Yeah.
woodies would be even more long term, but
Well, there seems to be a universal agreement that a seed strategy is vitally important to this whole process. So, you know, we're definitely on the right track.
all right, thank you, Sarah. It's 2:53, and I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. We're gonna start at 3 o'clock. I'm going to open up 2 breakout rooms. So this meeting will end, but there's going to be an informal meeting after the meeting. And if you know me at all, you know that I'm a big believer in providing opportunities for people to mingle, talk, share ideas. And that's really where the rubber hits the road on some of these ideas, and some of the connections, those important connections, can be made. So if you have to go back to work, or your families, you know, that's fine. But if you want to stick around for the chat, I'm going to open up these breakout rooms in a few minutes. And you'll have the option to go to the inside plants room to talk about that sort of thing, or you can stick around and go into the Toronto Seed Strategy room and to chat more about these ideas. We'll also be looking at some of these questions that have been coming up. And I just want to make sure that I haven't forgotten anybody. Let's have a look and see these questions. Maybe I forgot something. Hold on. Wow, there's a ton of questions here. Okay. I think, oh, Steve, you're managing the questions. Fantastic. Okay. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to try to open up these rooms, and we're going to have them open for half an hour. So from 3 to 3:30, and that way everybody can meet and talk. Now, before I let you go, let me say a few things. Number one, this second session was really just a meeting of this ad hoc Toronto Seed Strategy Working Group. So if you'd like more information about that, and if you want to get involved in that side of things, we have a whole bunch of resources, and we've got an email list, and we'll be providing the link for that in our follow-up email. So don't worry about that. The lists that were provided by the City of Toronto are also going to be shared, and they're also on the resource list resources that we've been sharing with everybody. If you're interested in the plant stuff, then just wait a few more minutes and then just jump on the inside plant side, and we can get more into that side as well. So without further ado, Davishka, am I okay to do this now, you think?
Unless anyone has any if you want to wait 4 minutes to answer any more questions, any pressing questions.
All right. So
we'll break out right at 3.
All right. So ideally, what's going to happen is you'll see a box on your screen, and you'll be able to choose the room that you want. So let's see. That did not. Is Davishka, are you seeing the boxes?
Not yet.
Okay. Okay. Are you seeing anything now? Okay.
Nothing yet. Maybe try stopping sharing. I don't know if that would make a difference.
Well, some people are going into the Toronto Seed Strategies room. I can see that. So maybe, maybe it's working. It is working.
All right. All right.
Okay. So for those of you who are not sure how to get into it, I'm going to try to walk you through this. From the main screen, if you look at the bottom, you'll see on the right-hand side something that says breakout rooms. And if you click on that, you'll have the option to join a room.
Okay. Lost, but the Toronto ones, and the closer you get to Toronto, the more likely you are that they're very highly at risk of being completely lost before they've even been recorded even. So I would say Toronto, Mississauga, you know, pretty close.
I might just add to what talking about at TRCA when I was there. I don't know, where's Paul? There's Paul. I had learned that we weren't GPS locating our tree elders, so our really significant trees. So we talked about the idea of an interpretive tree story map while we track the trees. But the back of my head, I was thinking seeds, you know, let's capture and hold and store these seeds.
Mhm. Well, some seeds can be stored for long term, and some of them are only good for the next season, and that's it.
But we need to identify where we can get them, though, right? And
I think that is something that maybe design climate action might be able to have a role to play there, because it's just a bunch of professionals, landscape architects who like to draw pretty pictures. So making maps, you know, is sort of something that they do very well. And I think that maybe once we look at the seed list and identify some species that are worth going after, then we're going to be in a position.
And there are people who specialize in this, actually. If you, for instance, the Haworthia that I was talking about at the end of the presentation that comes out of the fynbos, there are individuals, and there is an active trade in the seed of hybridizations among Haworthias. Also, Gasteria is another one that has this very ad hoc trading system going on for sharing seeds of hybrids. All of it outside of the native habitat of the Haworthias. But mind you, those kinds of breeding exercises require a very, very good knowledge of the sexual system of those particular species. They just don't cross-pollinate because they're side by each. You need to be very, very acutely aware of when you have to do the cross-pollination and how you have to do it. So I think in most cases, interior genetic mixing of related species is highly unlikely in most circumstances unless you're actively involved in doing it.
Yeah, because that makes it very different from the plant community model in
The outdoors.
in the outdoors, where there are really no physical barriers.
Yeah.
So it's really defying the laws of succession and the rest of the things that
Yes.
drive a plant's impulses.
Yeah.
It was just interesting.
Yeah, no, it's something that has been within my mind for a long time, that when you start doing something in an interior environment that's more ecologically based, the one thing that ultimately you would like to be able to come to some consensus about is how much is sexual reproduction and recruitment within the planting something that you're going to encourage, want, etc. Succession in a lot of these different habitats is highly fire dependent as well. So the disturbance regime is not going to be appropriate with these interior systems. Not that you can use fire in downtown Toronto either, but when you are thinking ecologically, it is not an object. It is a dynamic, flowing, unfolding system. And reproduction plays a role in that, and so does disturbance. And you have to think through to what degree would you accommodate either one of those in an interior environment. Maybe you don't do burning, maybe you do something else that has a similar effect. And then you then have to think about, well, what are the successional drivers? Where does the seed come from for the immediate post-fire or post-disturbance environment?
So then, if I could ask a question about designing an indoor environment like a green wall or an indoor mass planting, I guess part of the design when you pitch it to a client should also consider the timeline of the planting and how it's going to change over 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, well, even over the course of a year, depending on how much you're modeling on the basis of what happens in the natural habitat of these species. So the range of species, life forms, is quite significant too. So you would have shrubs of various kinds, and grasses and other herbaceous plants, whether they're ferns or flowering perennial type plants, even annuals. And the thing that you would not have to start with in an interior planting is a seed reservoir in the soil, a seed bank. You're not going to have that when you start out. And seed banks are hugely important in fire disturbed. Sorry, I'm on a fire route, our emergency route. Fire disturbed environments rely very heavily on banked seed in the soil to recover. And again, you're not going to have fire ripping through. But again, you have to talk about the dynamics at the scale of a year, but also, say, an outside period of 5 years, 10 years. And ultimately, I think you would also want, as part of something like this, you'd want an adaptive management framework, so that after you've implemented the design, there is a monitoring and analysis and feedback, so that as you move forward, you are keeping the system resilient, and working at building up whatever aspects of the whole planting are necessary for that resilience.
So then is it safe to assume that maybe because there is no seed bank and obviously fire disturbance is not possible indoors, that clonal species are, like suckering species, are expected to do better, just better suited to proliferation in that environment?
Well, in many of these environments, the degree of suckering is not the same as we might think of it in our own temperate outdoor environments. Things are more crown oriented. They don't sucker off, a foot or something and pop up a new plant. There are very few of those within these environments. What many of these plants do is they form a tight cluster of offsets that sort of like a garlic does. And they stay tightly in space together. And they're all genetically identical little clusters. They're all joined together initially. But over time, over several years, the cluster may disconnect so that they're then separate clonal clumps of them, but they're all very close together. They never go far afield. Far afield spread is usually by seed in these environments. So, or by animal transfer. And again, that's something that's not likely to happen. So maybe one of your management issues in general is, if you are after reproductive capacity in the planting, it has to be assisted. You have to be able to monitor and interseed. So a number of the herbaceous perennials that were on the list that I showed, they are pollinated by hummingbirds. And, you know, it would be nice to have hummingbirds indoors, but it's unlikely. So you have to be very interactive with the flowers yourselves with the right kind of brushes to affect the pollination that would typically be undertaken by hummingbirds. And the Haworthias and the Gasterias and the Fynbos are a case in point. In a spike of flowers, the first ones that open at the base of the spike, or the raceme, they open female on day 1. On day 2, they have ceased being female and they are male, and they shed their pollen. And this is a mechanism that prevents self-pollinization of flowers. And what it essentially means is that a plant has to be pollinated by another plant. So you need to monitor this on 2 plants, do the pollinations at the right time in order to get the seed. And then you need to provide the environment that's going to allow the seed to germinate. And for most of these species, that's not a huge issue. They're not cold stratifiable seed. They just fall, and then when there's enough moisture in the soil, they germinate. And there are ways that you can ensure that you get maximum germination, but it's still something that you're interseeding into the system to assist in the kind of reproductive recruitment that the species would experience in its natural habitat. And that's a management strategy thing. Because you don't have the vectors for pollination and in some cases for seed distribution. You don't have those vectors.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask the group if there are any questions for Sam about indoor plants or using references indoors.
I have a question about the light requirements for the ecosystem that you've referenced. I'm not really familiar with most of them. I know a bit about the chaparrals, and it seems that because this is a scrubland, so everything would require full sun all day. And
that's the major consideration is light. But of the species that I was choosing for the example, Jason, I was going through on the research side and checking for light requirement. And there's actually a wide tolerance for light level for many plants that grow in this particular environment. And one of the, what I might do here, just because this is quite useful and I've got the screen. I'm going to go to Google Earth and zoom in. I wish we could travel this fast. And get right in here. And then I am going to switch this to satellite view. And you can go in here, and this is, I'll come back to this in a moment. And now I'm going to do the, is it Diegan? Western Granitic Foothills. Oh, and it's coming up here. Okay. I want to see the map. No, this is just taking me in the wrong place. Okay, I'll just go back to here. This particular zone it runs through here. And when you get down here to this level, you see a lot of, there's a lot of trails through here, but this is very mountainous terrain. And at one point I could do this. I guess I'm not in the right place. The other thing to bring up here, I'm just going to move this box for a moment, is this map here. Okay. And when you go zoom in on this one, you can see again some of the area that's involved. Like we were in 5G, which is this area through here. Largely these slopes face to the, I guess this would be to the southwest somewhat, but the valleys are folded. So there's lots of areas where this will be in shade for half the day in this particular area. I'm going to back out because I want to do something here. I guess I'm not quite in the right area yet, so just put that aside. Here we are. I think it was over here that this was available. There are trails, and I'll just drop myself up on one of these trails, and you can see what I mean. So, oh, this is actually a road, not a trail. But you can see that the land is very folded. And this results in lots of microhabitats that are in half-day sun, half-day shade, and greater degrees of sun and shade. So there's a lot of variability in these habitats, and the plants are able to grow in full sun or in some cases in full shade. So you have to, when you're selecting your species and doing the research, you have to get at those light conditions through the websites that I was citing in order to get a sense of that. Now that said, on a day like today in Toronto, a plant sitting in the window in any direction except north is probably getting less light than they would in this time of year in Southern California if they're in a half-day sun situation. So some augmentation of light levels would be necessary, I think, if you wanted full performance out of the species.
Does anyone else have any questions for Sam?
I have a quick question, if that's all right.
Yeah.
Sure, Melissa.
Hi. So a lot of wall plantings I've seen, plants have been individually planted into like little pockets or very narrow, shallow troughs. In my mind, this doesn't seem ideal, but is this something that is okay for these plants?
Well, if your growing medium is appropriate, then you could possibly do it that way. What I would prefer to suggest, I think, I'm going back to here because there is one particular area on this map where previously I had landed in on a foot trail through here. And it was very instructive because the topography was really clear. That wasn't it. I'm going to try one of these things here. They say you can drop on these things. Oh, there's, okay. So you see the amount of stone that's present in these habitats. There's folding for you. Scrolling around. Look at the mist as well. This is interesting. I don't know what time of day this is. Or yeah. It's September 2016, but that isn't giving me a time of day. In any case, the question around the growing medium, if it's the right growing medium, then and you have enough volume for the plant, then you could use it in that kind of system. But in my mind's eye, if you're going to do an extensive planting, then I see that extensive planting as not being a dense planting by any means, but something that incorporates a sense of topography. So you would probably want to incorporate a certain amount of stone that is fairly substantial, maybe up to the size of a fist, and various other rock pieces where you don't have a plant. So the whole thing is being designed as plant soil, plant topography, and that is the unit in which the design is conceived and implemented. Doesn't lend itself entirely to a incredibly vertical, smooth kind of planting, I think, if you're thinking in terms of a wall. Go ahead, Jason.
I actually have been researching about a vertical wall, which is a bit more resilient than what we've seen commercially. And my current theory is that if we combine a bit of a in-ground or on-the-ground planter and use certain kinds of climbers, and perhaps a felt or an appropriate structure for the climbers to climb, then we can use less a lesser quantity of plants to cover a larger square footage. Say something like Monstera can cover like large. The leaf size itself is very big, and it can cover a lot.
Certainly, I think that in any wall-dependent planting that you might conceive, having the area at the floor and the wall as a ground-based, almost a talus slope-like planting would give you the opportunity to do that with these kinds of plants. With these kinds of plants, I do not see a solid mass of plants on a wall at all. I see something that is far more dynamic. There's far more rock pieces. But if you do incorporate that portion at the bottom of a wall on the floor, you can use that quite productively in the way that you're describing, Jason. I only chose one plant that had a kind of climbing habit, and that was the pea. But there are others within this particular ecoregion that are, for want of a better word, vine-like and can climb, or that have that capacity to stretch upward, and they're not shrubs. There are others, but I just didn't use them because I had a limited amount of time. I think this goes as far as your imagination wants to take you. The more ecological you are in how you want to pull it all together, the more you have to research not just the species of plant, not just what it's going to look like, but how it grows and what other things it's typically found growing with, and also what dependencies does it have for pollinators, for seed distributors particularly. Those aspects of its ecology would be really important if you're going to do the full ecological approach in the design.
So we have a few minutes left, so I want to invite any other questions from this breakout room. And if there aren't any, there are some questions in the chat from the first session that we can address.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any questions? Okay, so Sam, I just wanted to ask a question from the chat from before, just in the last couple of minutes. What proportion of existing indoor plants on the market here or globally come from the main regions that you've identified with similar natural conditions to our quote unquote human indoors? Do you have an idea of that?
Well, it would be just my sense of it. Particularly for, say, Southern Ontario. I can't speak globally, but in Southern Ontario, and this waxes and wanes quite a bit. I would say maybe 30% of what's available for indoor plants by way of different species, etc. Not by quantity, but by species. I would say about 30% of the species that are available locally from these 5 regions of the globe are specifically from those regions. But I would say specifically much more out of the fynbos of South Africa and out of similar regions to Southern California. Now, there's a lot of plants that get used in an indoor environment that come out of very dry climates, like deserts and semi-deserts, such as cacti in North America and euphorbias in Africa. They're heavily represented in the trade. In general, I would say most of the trade comes from other kinds of ecosystems in the tropics, particularly rainforest.
Like yuccas, for example.
Yeah, yuccas are primarily American. Agaves from parts of Mesoamerica. There are, not that anybody wants to grow an agave indoors, although I have one.
People do. People,
I
think they sell them at IKEA even.
Well,
Exactly.
I have one I started from seed, and it's getting too big. And it's got very, very sharp tips to its leaves that make it brutally difficult to manipulate. But, you know, they do thrive. They do quite well in interior environments, but in their native habitats, they typically require a much sharper annual temperature variation than what we can give them in an interior environment.
I think someone also